The Lost Islamic History, Chapter 2 Part 2. As said by Quran, woe to every scorner and mocker, who collects wealth and continuously counts it. He thinks his wealth will make him immortal. No, he will surely be thrown into the fire. Quran 104, 1-4. At the same time, the core ideas of Islam began to take shape through continuing revelations, which would be shared throughout the community. Strict monotheism, far different from the prevailing religion of Mecca, was the core theme. According to Muhammad, there was only one God. The idols worshipped by the Meccans were nothing more than useless statues of stone and wood, and were incapable of bringing benefit to anyone. The verses also warned of a day of reckoning, when all souls would be brought before God to account for their deeds. Those who believed in God and did good deeds would enter an eternal heaven as a reward. Those who did not would have a place in hell and would be eternally tormented. But Islam was not just concerned with theology and life after death. The early verses also denounced social ills that were prevalent in Mecca. With increasing prosperity from the trade routes, distinct social classes developed. The wealthy would use their money to fund more caravans that would in turn bring them more wealth. A poor person, meanwhile, continued to be marginalized, doubly so if they did not belong to a powerful clan. The Quran declared such disregard for the poor as detrimental to the establishment of a just social order, and worthy of punishment in the hereafter. It would be years until the rules regarding society would be laid down, but from early on, it was clear that Muhammad had come not just to change people's religious beliefs, but also society itself. The early revelations repeated these themes numerous times. The verses and chapters revealed in Mecca, which are found towards the end of the Quran, tended to be short and to the point. This worked well for the nascent Muslim community, which was still unknown to the rest of the city. When around fellow believers, the Muslims would discuss the latest revelations among themselves and teach each other. When around non-Muslims, they had to hide their conversion and beliefs. After all, these new ideas would threaten the established social order of Mecca. Social, economic and tribal equality flew directly in the face of the wealthy and powerful members of Quraysh. Social revolution is rarely welcomed by those in positions of power. Even if Muhammad had not advocated any change in society, the new beliefs alone were a threat to the economic and social position of the polytheists. Because of the Kaaba, Mecca was a religious center for Arabs throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Once a year, Arabs would travel to Mecca for a pilgrimage and to honor the hundreds of idols kept around the Kaaba. This meant big business for the Quraysh. Trade was a natural byproduct of the pilgrimage. With people from so many distant lands in the same place at the same time, a natural market evolved which made Mecca a religious, economic, and political focal point of Arabia. And as the facilitators of this trade, the Quraysh stood to make huge profits. Muhammad's message, however, denied the importance of the idols, emphasizing the unity of God. Without idols, there would be no pilgrimage. With no pilgrimage, there would be no business. This was not a scenario that was pleasing to the Quraysh, and the early followers of Muhammad knew that. For this reason, there could be no mention of this new religion around the leaders of the tribe. The Muslim community was still small and weak enough that it could not yet come into open ideological conflict with those in positions of power. Especially considering the fact that most of the early converts were those who were considered the lowest class of society. Slaves, servants, and the poor made up a large proportion of the early Muslim community, attracted by the equality of all people before God and the egalitarian nature of the new religion, where wealth and social status did not determine a person's worth. Persecution. Eventually, the size of the Muslim community became too large for the rest of Quraysh to ignore. Previously, the Muslims had been able to perform their prayers together in a secluded area on the outskirts of the town. But as their prayer groups grew larger, the chances of them being seen increased. That is exactly what happened as a group of praying Muslims were seen by a group of idol worshippers, whose immediate reaction was to ridicule the Muslims and their prayer. At first, the Quraysh were content to view the small community as an abnormality to be mocked until they realized the gravity of these new ideas. Monotheism, social justice, equality, and submission to the rule of God were all threatening theories to the Quraysh. In the eyes of many leading members of Quraysh, the solution was to rid themselves of this new religious and social movement by getting rid of the source, Muhammad. But Arab society still had structure and rules. Although Muhammad was an orphan, he was still under the protection of his uncle, Abu Talib, who was the leader of the Banu Hashim clan of Quraysh. Abu Talib himself refused to accept Islam, but his dignity and respect for Arab social customs demanded that he protect his nephew. Furthermore, age-old Arab customs dictated that if Muhammad was killed, his clan would have permission to go after his killers, and thus civil war could break out on the streets of Mecca. So Muhammad himself could not be harmed, but the protection that he enjoyed was not extended to his followers, many of whom were not protected by any clan or family. The Quraysh decided to threaten and persecute them, in the hopes of discouraging others from joining the new religion. Muslims were thus regularly harassed and deprived of the same rights as polytheists in Mecca. While Muhammad himself had protection, he was powerless to stop the oppression of his followers. Quraysh also took steps to prevent the spread of the new religion outside of Mecca. A group of Muslim refugees who escaped to Abyssinia was promised protection by its Christian king, the Negus. The Quraysh sent emissaries after them, hoping to convince the king to give up his protection and send the Muslims back to Mecca to be persecuted. When the Negus heard Muhammad's cousin Jafar recite verses from the Quran about Islamic beliefs regarding Jesus and Mary, he refused to forsake his fellow monotheists, and the Quraysh hoped to go back to Mecca without the refugee Muslims. But even if Muslims had not escaped to distant lands, Islam could still spread beyond Mecca. Thousands of Arabs visited the city each year, and if some of those visitors heard Muhammad's message and saw Quraysh's inability to stop his unorthodox ideas, the status of Quraysh as one of the leading tribes in the peninsula would begin to wane. Alternatively, the visitors would believe Muhammad, accept his religion, and take it back to their homelands, spreading Islam outside of Mecca and making it harder to stop. All of this led to the extreme measures taken by the Quraysh. In 617, approximately 7 years after the first revelations, the Quraysh decided to implement an all-out boycott on Muhammad's clan, Banu Hashim, to whom many Muslims belonged. No one was to enter into any business transactions with them, nor marry anyone to a member of the clan. They were even forced into exile in a barren valley just outside of Mecca. This had disastrous humanitarian effects on the Muslim community. Persecution brought hunger, social isolation, and economic woes to the Muslims, and even the non-Muslims who happened to be part of Banu Hashim, such as Abu Talib. The few Muslims not belonging to Banu Hashim, such as Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, did all they could to supply the persecuted group by circumventing the boycott's rules, although at a great personal loss. The boycott was draining on the entire Muslim community, those belonging to Banu Hashim as well as other clans. In the end, the boycott was ineffective in persuading Muhammad to discontinue his preaching, and it was thus ended after just over a year of enforcement. Despite Quraysh's efforts, more people continued to accept Islam. The boycott also revealed the strength of ties in the young community, as those not a part of Banu Hashim were still willing to sacrifice their wealth and safety to help their brothers and sisters that were being persecuted. Here, one of the core concepts of Islam, that loyalty to the religion transcended loyalty to a tribe or family, was on full display. The boycott was not without its effects, however. Years of being denied food and access to shelter, coupled with physical abuse, took a toll on the Muslims. The persecution probably played a role in the death of the Prophet's wife, Khadijah, in 619. She had been the first convert and had stood by Muhammad through the adversity he had faced at the hands of Quraysh. The emotional support she provided in the early years was indispensable for the Prophet, encouraging him to continue in the face of persecution. The loss was a huge one on Muhammad, but it was not the only loss he had to deal with. Soon afterward, his uncle who had protected him, Abu Talib, became ill and died. Although he did not accept Islam, he endured persecution like the rest of Banu Hashim and never gave up the protection of his nephew. Beyond being another emotional loss for Muhammad, the death of Abu Talib had huge implications for the Muslim community. Without a strong leader, there was little to protect Muhammad and the rest of the Muslim community from the leaders of Quraysh, who were becoming bolder in their attacks on the Muslims, verbally as well as physically. Despite his love for the city of Mecca, Muhammad decided to try to find another city that would accept him and give him more freedom to preach his religion than the Quraysh did. The natural choice was Taif, a town ruled by the tribe of Thaqif, 65 kilometers to the southeast of Mecca. He rode out to Taif and met with the three brothers who led the tribe. They unequivocally rejected his proposal that they accept Islam and refused to grant him any form of protection. To make matters worse, on his way out of the city and back to Mecca, a crowd of people from Taif gathered to pelt him with stones and insults, leaving him bloodied by the time he was safely out of range of the city. Islamic tradition holds that he was visited by the angel Jibreel, who asked the Prophet if he would like him to destroy the city of Taif between two mountains as punishment for their treatment of the Messenger of God. The Prophet replied in the negative, stating that he hopes perhaps one of their descendants would one day be a believer. This event would play a huge role in the spiritual connection between Indian Muslims and the Prophet in later centuries. After losing his family's support, being rejected by neighboring tribes, and watching his own followers persecuted for their faith, Muhammad recognized that a radical change was necessary if Islam was to survive at all. The opportunity for such a change came from an oasis town 300 kilometers north of Mecca, Ithrib. The two main tribes of Ithrib, Aus and Khazraj, were engaged in a perpetual struggle for power that turned deadly in the 610 seconds. Further exasperating the problem, numerous Jewish tribes also lived in Ithrib and had trouble coexisting with the local Arabs. Muhammad's reputation as a trustworthy and reliable man was already well known in Ithrib, and it was in 620 when numerous notables from the town travelled to Mecca to seek his emigration to Ithrib to serve as their leader and a mediator of their disputes. Muhammad accepted their offer and encouraged his followers in Mecca to make the journey with him, where the oppression of the Quraysh was absent. Muhammad himself was one of the last to leave Mecca in 622, when he journeyed with his close friend Abu Bakr, barely eluding Quraysh's plans to have him murdered before he could leave. In Ithrib, which was soon renamed Al-Medina al-Munawwara, officially known as Medina, Muhammad would find security and the ability to spread Islam away from Quraysh's opposition. Medina. The Prophet's flight from Mecca was known as the Hijrah, meaning the emigration. It marked a turning point in early Islamic history and is used to this day as the beginning of the Islamic calendar. No longer was the Muslim community a marginalized group and Muhammad a social outcast. The Muslim community would now turn Medina into the first Muslim state, and Muhammad into its leader. The example set by the Prophet in his 10 years in Medina would inspire hundreds of years of Muslim politics, social order, and economics. But life in Medina was certainly not without challenges. Chief among them was the new mix of emigrants from Mecca, known as the Muhajirun, and the original residents of Medina, the Ansar. The Muhajirun were not a single cohesive unit. None of the clans of Mecca converted entirely, so the community of immigrants represented a diverse group of people, on their own without the protection of a clan or tribe. In contrast, the Ansar belonged to either Aus or Khazraj, the two embattled tribes of the oasis. Furthermore, there were numerous individuals who belonged to neither group, immigrants from lands as far away as Africa, Persia, and the Byzantine Empire. For many Muslims, where their loyalties should lie was a major question. In response, the Prophet made clear that the old pre-Islamic ideas of loyalty were outdated. Instead, they were superseded by loyalty to the Ummah, the Muslim nation. In the eyes of Muhammad, it did not matter if a Muslim hailed from Quraysh, Aus, Khazraj, or even the Jewish tribes. Once they accepted Islam, they were part of a new community of brotherhood based on shared belief, not shared ancestry. The Jews are one community with the believers. To the Jews their religion, and to the Muslims their religion. To their clients and to themselves, with the exception of anyone who has done wrong or committed treachery, for he harms only himself and his family. The Constitution of Medina. Muhammad's new political and social order in Medina came to be codified in a text known as the Constitution of Medina. The Constitution detailed that, under Muhammad's authority, Medina would operate as a state based on Islamic law. The Ummah was to operate as one political unit. Furthermore, Muhammad would act as the city's ultimate arbitrator. Old Arab customs regarding revenge and honor in the face of injustice were eliminated in favor of a structured justice system based on Islamic law. The Constitution gave the Oasis's Jews freedom to practice their religion, but they had to recognize the political authority of Muhammad over the city and join the common defense in the case of an attack from Quraysh. Muhammad's nascent political entity in Medina would serve as the model Islamic state for centuries of Muslim governments, particularly with regards to the treatment of non-Muslim minorities. The nature of the continuing revelations changed to match the change in circumstances for the Muslim community. Verses and chapters revealed to Muhammad in Medina tended to be longer than the ones from Mecca, detailing things such as forms of worship, taxation, inheritance, and relations between Muslims and non-Muslims. The Quran provided the generalities of how a Muslim society should operate, and where necessary, Muhammad explained the precise details. His words and actions, known as the Hadith, were a vital source of guidance and law, second only to God's revelation itself. But the Quran was not only concerned with law and social order. Many of the Medinese verses described the stories of earlier prophets. Stories of Noah, Abraham, Moses, David and Jesus were all described in great detail to Muhammad's followers, making very clear that Muhammad was simply the last in a long line of prophets, and that his message is no different from theirs. Much of this was aimed at the Jewish community of Medina. On the surface, they shared much in common with the Muslims. They were both monotheistic in a land known for polytheism, they both revered the same prophets, and early on in Muhammad's prophethood, they both prayed towards Jerusalem. As a result, some of Medina's Jews accepted Muhammad as a prophet and converted to Islam. Jewish scriptures speak of a Messiah, and to them, Muhammad was that promised man. But many more rejected Muhammad. Judaism is unique in that belief and ethnicity were tied to the concept of a chosen people. Muhammad's message of egalitarianism and the unity of all Muslims regardless of ethnicity challenged some of the main ideas the Jews believed in. Some probably genuinely believed he was a prophet, but the fact that he was not a Hebrew was problematic for those who followed Jewish theology strictly. The divide between a Jewish community that believed themselves to be specially chosen by God and a Muslim community that advocated the unity of all people would develop into serious tensions between the two faith groups.